Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, Paul is speaking with Jungian analyst Jason Smith. Jason is a past president of the C.G. Jung Institute, Boston, now the C.G. Jung Institute of New England, and currently serves as a training analyst and faculty member for the New England Institute. He is the host of the podcast Digital Jung and the author of the book Religious but Not Religious, Living a Symbolic Life. Jason is in private practice in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts.
Hi, everybody. There are books so deep, so rich, so intense with soul speak that even a sentence can spin me into a deep contemplative meditation for hours, days, months, or even years as I travel through wormhole after wormhole, accumulating more and more understanding, more and more meaning. Here is one of such numerous passages from an amazing, powerful, and important book for our times, Religious but Not Religious, by Jason E. Smith, a Jungian analyst and our special guest on Living 4D today. A symbol is more than just a particularly elaborate or esoteric image, and is so much more than simply an idea expressed in image form. It is, rather, the expression of a field of psychic energy. As I noted earlier, this field can manifest through images, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, situations, and objects. A symbol, then, might be thought of as an extension of a unit of life energy. It is for this reason that Edinger suggested that it was important to approach a symbol as a living thing. Put another way, a symbol is not something to be interpreted, but rather something with which one enters into a relationship. Through the encounter with symbols, our psychological system is infused with vitalizing energy that supports and furthers our engagement with life. When an individual is in a conscious relationship with the symbolic dimension, life is meaningful and abounding with the energy of purpose. Now, if that message doesn't send you into deep meditation, then check for a pulse, baby. I so enjoyed dialoguing with Jason E. Smith on such important topics as his life path to becoming a Jungian analyst, the 4 functions of religion and their correlation to mythology, why it may be that humans have sought God and religion for as far back in time as we have anthropological records, the difference between authentic religion and corporate religion, what it means to be religious but not religious, what a myth is, and why human beings have a deep need for the numinous, for mystical experience. Jason is an honest, heart-centered man who speaks from the depth of his life experience and wisdom as a Jungian analyst, and I hope you enjoy learning from him and growing in this process as much as I did. Enjoy Jason E. Smith as we discuss his amazing book, Religious but Not Religious, which I personally feel is an approach to life very needed in today's world. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today, I am very excited to share an author and a Jungian analyst who wrote a book that captured my attention in the first few paragraphs. And by the time I got a chapter or 2 in, I jumped up out of my chair, tracked him down, and offered to interview him. His name is Jason E. Smith. The book that I was reading by him is titled Religious but Not Religious, Living a Symbolic Life, and it's stunningly beautiful. Jason, welcome to Living 4D.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for inviting me here.
I really felt your books not only important in any era, but particularly right now with what's going on in the world between the political unrest, the COVID environment, the manipulation of freedom of speech by Google and Facebook and related companies, the challenges with social media, censorship. To me, it looks like we're in a myth transition of significance. And having studied Jung and many Jungian analysts and had time to interview James Hollis, I just think that some of Jung's concepts could be very, very helpful if brought into the light of public awareness. So I really wanted to talk to you about some of these things. And I think with all the stuff going on right now, people that understand what religion is and embrace religion in its authentic form can be greatly supported through this process. But those that are caught in what I call corporate religion and heavy polarities and hell and damnation can actually find themselves feeling very scared, very confused, and maybe thinking it's the end of days, which is pretty a common reaction for people at that level of conscious development. So before we begin, Jason, with the topics of the book, I'd love it if you can share a biographical overview of what led you to becoming a Jungian analyst and having an interest in the issues of religion.
Sure. It was not on the radar for me, and I had been working actually originally as an actor. I'd been very active in the theater. Yeah, and it's actually not so far off from where I end up, because as a actor in theater, you're interested in human development, right? You're interested in what makes human beings tick. The thing that kind of tipped it for me was a gift that I got. Someone handed me a book of Joseph Campbell's work, and I was totally captivated by it.
I know the feeling well.
It was an amazing experience that made me realize I'd been thinking about things and having these questions without really knowing that I had the questions. And so I just I was off and running. I read everything that I could get my hands on with Joseph Campbell. I read it all, including this edited book that he has, which is called The Portable Jung. And that, sent me off on the next tangent, following Jung's work and reading Jungian psychology. But my initial response was both sort of simultaneously, this is it. This is where I want to be. This is what I want to do. But there's no way on God's green earth that I'm ever getting there. That's so far away from who I am and where I am that it's just not going to happen. It seemed like this great fantasy. And it took a long time to kind of slowly inch my way towards it, and, step by step, kind of realizing that it was closer in my grasp than I thought it was. And, at the same time, it coincides with an experience of getting that book, that initial book, coincides with this experience, like I said, of knowing all of a sudden that I have these questions and recognizing that I had very much a religious sensibility from the very beginning, but no language for it, no way of communicating it even to myself. And so that language from Joseph Campbell and from Jung opened everything up for me. So it was an amazing gift that, probably the person who gave it to me has no idea how that changed the trajectory for me.
Isn't it amazing how a person can touch our soul so deeply? And, often I call these soul contracts where, it's kind of like the Buddhist master. Somebody goes up to the Buddhist master and says, "Master, if I study with you, how long will it take to become enlightened?" And the master says, "It may take 15 seconds and it may take 35 years. It's up to you."
Right.
Meaning that, the book was the touch from the the mysterious master, the connection between souls.
Absolutely. It's the key that opens the door. There's the messenger. I've had a number of those experiences where it's literally an offhand phrase from someone walking past me that makes me go, "Oh, okay, that's the next thing I do." If you notice that and you can follow that, it can be pretty amazing in terms of what it opens up for you.
Yes, I believe my experience in life is that there's a golden thread connecting all the events of our life. But I found in my work as a therapist and a lifestyle coach and trainer of elite athletes and many other such things that we oftentimes don't have the depth of perception to see that golden thread until we reach a certain level of either conscious growth or spiritual maturity. But all of a sudden we look and see, even in the darkest times of our life, there was something meaningful being generated that ultimately made us who we are, so we could get to the places and meet the people and be for those people what we were meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd love it if you could overview the functions of religion. I noticed right away that you had imported Joseph Campbell's 4 functions of myth to be the equal of 4 functions of religion. And I know those very well because I too have studied many, many Joseph Campbell books and love him. And so I don't think very many people in the world actually are conscious. I've got friends that are pretty evolved, and I could count on half of a hand the people I've met that actually understand the 4 functions of mythology or religion. So I think it's a great place to lay the groundwork for the rest of our discussion. So I'd love to just let you run with it and give us an overview of what religion's really supposed to do for us.
Yeah, sure. These concepts like the 4 functions, that in itself, just that little section of Joseph Campbell's work, if you dig into it, it gives you so much. And it's almost hidden in a lot of what he writes. But I grabbed it, and using his idea, because he's a mythologist, that myths could be understood as other people's religions, that he's really talking about a religious sensibility. I kind of, like you say, I imported it. And really what it's all about is how we relate to ourselves, to each other, to the world and the universe around us, and to the mystery of being. Those are the 4 areas that myth or religion directs us to our own depths, ourselves, to how we connect with each other, to our place in the world, and just the mystery of existence. So the 4 areas are the psychological function. I call it the psychological. Joseph Campbell goes back and forth between psychological and pedagogical. And he talks about it as, right, he talks about it's the thing that through which we learn about how to live our own individual life and come into relationship with our own psyche. And one of the things about this for me is that I remember one of my teachers saying, a human life is too short for learning how to live a human life.
Yeah, it's a good point.
We don't have time to make up and come into contact with all of the possible experiences, all that has been thought and named and known. We just don't have time to do that on our own. And so the religions and the wisdom traditions store that knowledge for us, and they give us this map for how to understand what we're going through in relationship to how that appears in general for human beings uh, all over the world, and of all ages and all times.
Yeah, and of all different races and cultural backgrounds and mindsets. It's a panoply of experiences for sure. Some of the various authors that I've studied have suggested that we reincarnate through each of the world religions so that we can actually understand life from each of those perspectives, so that we can actually get a sense of wholeness of what life really is. And other authors speaking along the same vein say we reincarnate through each of the 12 signs of the zodiac for the same reasons. But, whether a person believes in reincarnation or not, the real issue is back to the point that you're right. One human lifetime is very, very short to even begin to get the depth and the meaning that life is offering us.
Absolutely. And there is that wide scope, and each culture, each religion is complete in its own way, but also is incomplete. They're not interchangeable, but they give us altogether a kind of wholeness that we need to have some connection to, some understanding of.
I think that, my experience, and I've studied world religion quite a lot because as a therapist, repeatedly I kept tracking people's behaviors and what got them, the choices that got them into trouble with diet, lifestyle, relationships, etc., right back to religious beliefs. And I found in my work that so many people had confused understandings of their religion, or would often quote Bible passages to me, not knowing that I've studied this stuff quite extensively. And 99.99% of the time, their interpretation of what that meant was dangerously distorted and was directly connected to their own harboring of guilt, shame, and negative emotions that were often showing up linked to cancer or things like irritable bowel syndrome or any number of things. It was only when I could really help bring them some more light and some more clarity and give them a broader context within which to interpret the scriptures that they were hanging their choices on, was I able to actually move them forward to long-term healing.
Right. Yeah, it's such a delicate relationship with the scripture, the information, the knowledge, the wisdom that's there, whether we impose on it or we let it touch us. And that's that psychological dimension. Can we let ourselves be initiated by that and therefore changed by it, as opposed to try to sort of force it into a worldview, our perspective that already exists?
Did you know that research shows that Americans are spending $4 billion a year on cold and flu medicine? That's 4,000 times $1 million. That's a lot of money every day on cold and flu medicines, when really there's a better way. Organifi Gold is an all-natural organic superfood tea with superfoods known to boost immunity through better rest and sleeping. Relax easier and increase immunity with all-natural superfoods. Deeper sleep and a more relaxed state of mind are vital ingredients to optimizing one's immunity. My kids don't like to fall asleep because they don't want to miss out on anything, and that can make for some grumpy kids, but they both love Organifi Gold, so we all get excited when they request it at night, and it works. If you'd like a great tasting, naturally sweet drink that can really relax and nourish you, then you will love Organifi Gold. I sure do. Organifi Gold contains the following organic products: turmeric, ginger, reishi mushroom, lemon balm, turkey tail mushroom, magnesium, black pepper piperine, coconut milk, and Ceylon cinnamon. I love Organifi Gold. My family and friends and clients love it too. And if you're ready to get great sleep and awaken feeling strong and ready for your day, with the beauty that only sleep can give, then Organifi Gold is not only for you, but it's a great way to make sure you're getting a deep enough rest to recharge your immune system. And we all know the importance of that today. Go to Organifi.com, that's Organifi.com, and on checkout, use the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 20, that's Chek 20, to get your Living 4D 20% discount off Organifi Gold and any Organifi product that you'd like to enjoy. I love Organifi, and I know you will too.
I think the word you use that carries a tremendous amount of potency is forcing it. And my experience of religion myself, my mother began as a Christian Scientist, which is a very intensely polarized religion where there's no belief in the medical system and a variety of other things. And then she became a yogi and joined the Self-Realization Fellowship under the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda when I was 12. And for the first time, I could get any question I could ask the monks answered in clear, intelligible ways instead of being told to be quiet. And I found that, the monks were so easy. And as a kid, I remember sitting in the pews of a Christian church, and it was very, very confusing to me because one minute they were telling me that God is love, and the next minute they were telling me God will burn me in hell if I do this or that. And as an 8-year-old kid, I couldn't see the logic in that, and so I would ask people questions, and I wouldn't get an answer that made me feel safe at all. And I actually reached the point by the time my mother had transitioned to yoga, I'd reached the point where I was actually scared to death of adults because I kept seeing that things that were just common sense to me and obvious, like, why do you want to believe in a God that'll burn you in hell that also says it loves you? That sounds like a dangerous relationship to me. So in my own head, I was like really scared. I actually had periods of a lot of fear and anxiety. And unfortunately, my father drowned when I was 8, and my stepfather was very violent. So it was just the greatest blessing when my mother switched to yoga or Self-Realization Fellowship. And I'll never forget, one of the most profound experiences in my life was my first time sitting in a Self-Realization Fellowship temple, and they begin the ceremony. And the monk leading the ceremony introduced the ceremony by saying, Heavenly Father, Jesus Christ, Paramahansa Yogananda, Sri Yukteswar, Lahiri Mahashai, Babaji, Krishna, saints and sages of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. And it was like a wave of peace ran through my body. And it was the first time I'd ever been exposed to any kind of spiritual teachings that were inclusive of, not completely and utterly against other teachings. And it really had a deep healing effect on me, just those opening words, and it's never left me.
Yeah. That's beautiful, because it's this something very fixed and hard all of a sudden becomes opened up, and something flows, right? Life flows. That peace that you feel flows. It's amazing. It's a lovely thing.
I felt in my own little 12-year-old head, I really just felt a sense of hope. Maybe I'll survive all of this crazy place called Earth.
Right.
At least I have some place to go where I can get my questions answered, and people aren't going to belittle me or beat me up.
Right. But that's the whole ball of wax right there. Hope, possibility that it's okay to be here. That's so crucial.
Especially for children. And having spent years researching world religion and looking at all the ills I've had to work with in my patients and how many of them were suicidal, and it tracked right back to stress from parents over religious must-dos, sinning and all these other types of things. I just, I really feel that, for example, I was researching and I came across this summer camp for Christians for kids. And they had like an hour video kind of showing what the kids go through. And it was literally designed to scare the living hell out of kids. It was like going into a haunted house, and it was just one set after the other where the devil tries to get you, and all the things that'll happen if you touch your genitals or break any of the commandments. And by the time the kids come out of that place, they just must have their small intestine must be tied in knots, and they must just be scared to death of God. And I think that to scare children and put a barrier between them and God is the most unreligious thing you can possibly do. And I have studied documentaries showing how the kids in the regions of Islam in many regions have to study the Quran intensely and memorize it word for word, or they may get punished or they get belittled. And I'm like, that is not religion. That's indoctrination. And it's not healthy. It's extremely dangerous. And we'll talk more about the interpretation of scriptures later, because a lot of the interpretations being passed on to children and young minds are far from what they're meant to be, based on, the more enlightened interpretations of them. What do you feel is the etiology of our urge for religion? It seems to me that it borders on being instinctual to us, considering that almost every culture studied by anthropologists have left religious artifacts and indications of a religious orientation of one form or another, and that includes shamanism, which is really the root of religion. Although if you try to tell a lot of religious people that your religion emerged from shamanism, you might as well have criticized them severely or stole their car or something.
Right. Yeah. Jung has that sense that it's instinctual, right? That there is a religious function of the psyche, that there is a kind of instinct in us. And it does seem to me that it comes with consciousness, that comes with this capacity that we have to step back from life and think about it or reflect on it or look at it. And the moment you do that, you start to notice things. The quality of our attention shifts, not just from satisfying some impulse or some desire, but we start to wonder about what's around us. And for me, I think that idea of wonder and awe is key. It's core. We're used to approaching the world through our reason, through our rational mind, and that's an amazing ability that we have. But reason and the rational is this attempt to make reality, to make the universe conform to our mental categories, right? We adapt the world out there to our minds. And wonder goes in the other direction. We adapt our own experience to the world out there. And it's not something that we know more about or we have power over, but we're kind of blown open, blown away. And for me, I think it's that core experience of wonder that opens us up. It's the heart of things like art. It's the heart of things like philosophy, and it's the heart of ethical behavior, which comes out of a sense of the sacred, that something is sacred and should be treated as such, that we should behave towards it in a particular way. And it's all of that sense of awe that I think is the core and at the root.
Yes, and sorry, I was just going to say, in Joseph Campbell's Four Functions of Mythology or Religion, as you've posted them, there's repeated mention of maintaining that sense of awe in response to the magic and the mystery of life. And I think most people today have completely lost that. It's as though they've got their nose so close to the television screen they can't see the picture, you know?
Right. Right. Absolutely. To keep that sense of awe, which is also a sense of, I have no idea what this is, right? Not knowing, rather than trying to master it and control it, to be, to hold that space of wow, of I have no idea what's going on, the mystery of things. That's very hard and uncomfortable for many people to stay in, because it makes us, it relativizes our experience. The world is bigger than us. The universe is bigger than us. It's bigger than our minds. And that's very, very humbling.
Yeah, and the ego is a control freak, as you know. So anything, the issue of mystery and wonder is you have no idea what's going to happen next, but the ego wants to know it's going to get its airplane flight and it's going to land safe and it's going to get its paycheck and its partner is going to show up and still be in love with them. So, I'm a medicine man and spirit guide and have conducted hundreds of healing ceremonies with plant medicines. And, you really see how people, when facing a mystery, get often very, very nervous and anxious and can't relax. And generally, the more wound up they are, the more of an ego encapsulation they're about to experience the dissolving of. And so the ego's kind of like I said, it's a control freak, and it likes to make sure it controls the outcomes of everything because it has this illusion that it's creating safety for itself. But I think you and I and anybody with some life experience knows that that is an illusion. It is, and it's not working very well for most people.
Right. It's absolutely an illusion. And that's the other side too, which is that we can't avoid the dark side of things. We can't avoid the falling apart of our carefully constructed worlds. We can't avoid suffering, loss, these realities around us. And they're mysteries too. Death is an enormous mystery. It gives some color and meaning to life, but it also has its own reality. And so that also opens up this place of questioning, of humility before the mystery, of, as you said, not knowing where things are going to turn out and how it's going to proceed. If we want to become authentically ourselves, this is another great Joseph Campbell line is, in order to have the life that's waiting for you, you have to give up the life you've planned.
Amen.
That's
terrifying. There's another saying too. If you want to make God laugh, tell him you've got a plan.
Right. Exactly.
The only thing I don't like about that is it's tell him. I prefer to say tell her, because as I tell my students all the time, I don't know why they keep referring to God as a man, because it doesn't take a lot of intelligence to see that men can't give birth to anything.
Right. That's absolutely right. But that whole plan, exactly, just trying to control it and being able to move forward when the plan falls apart and say, okay, something new is happening. That's a real achievement.
I reached a point in my own spiritual development. I'm 59. How old are you?
I'm 53.
53. So I'm a little older than you, but I reached a point. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but, I've been through a lot of deep, profound experiences. I studied with a Tai Chi master and did about 18 years of daily Tai Chi, and I was trained in Qigong, medical Qigong, and did, too many very carefully planned and orchestrated medicine ceremonies for my own spiritual investigations. But I got to the point where it dawned on me one day. I imagine I was probably in my late 40s, early 50s, but it dawned on me that every single time I've had a painful experience, whether it be a divorce or I went through a bankruptcy or something, whatever the kind of negative stuff that we always dread showing up in our life. But all of a sudden, one day I realized every single time something like that's happened, usually within a day or 2 weeks or a month, something amazing happens. And I realized that, it really reminded me of something Napoleon Hill said in, I don't know if it was in Think and Grow Rich or his bigger book, which is more of a comprehensive manual, but he said, behind every cloud of gray is a silver lining. And it took me that long to finally realize, okay, whenever the shit hits the fan, I got to orient myself toward the silver lining and know that there's a gift hiding in this. And having studied a lot of Arnold Mendel's works, he talks about how people are afraid of chaos, but they don't realize that the whole universe came out of chaos. When you study creation myths, you see that that's a very consistent theme. And he says, if you just become present with the chaos, you'll find it's full of all sorts of useful information, but you have to be present with it in order to gather and gain the information. You can't be reactive and run from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It reminds me of the Rumi poem, The Guest House, where he talks about,
I love that one.
They come in and they take all the furniture, but let them come, because they might be sweeping it out to make room for something new, for what's coming next.
Yes. I've got the entire collected works of Rumi. I think I have about 70-something thousand poems by Rumi in my library, and been studying him as long as I've been studying Jung. And in fact, I connect to him through my soul regularly. And he's a great resource. I'll tell you, he's one of my favorite Rumi poems. It has a line in it that says, "No man can get to God until he becomes a heretic." And I said, bingo.
Yeah. Right. It's great.
Yeah. What he's saying is you can't become enlightened or have a real mystical or deep union experience by reading words on a piece of paper. Those are symbols pointing towards somebody else's experience, not your own. And that's one of the real problems, I think, with all religious scripture that's being interpreted as literal, when really it's, people forget that's somebody else's experience. And often it's actually a myth that carries much deeper messages than what they're reading. And because they don't realize that, they end up just putting themselves in all sorts of pain, especially the children have to be the brunt of all that confusion.
Well, I think that's right. That idea of being a heretic, of letting go of the image, at some point letting it go. I mean, all the mystics talk about this. Meister Eckhart says, at some point you have to leave God for God.
Amen.
The idea and the image is in the way. It's a help, it's a guide, but it ultimately is in the way. And that's a constant theme with the mystics, that you have to look beyond, or let it go, not be attached. Kill the Buddha on the road. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him.
Yep. Most people don't understand that. In other words, that just confuses people that aren't mature enough in their own conscious or spiritual development. But really, for those listening, what that saying means, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, means that Buddha, which means love or the awakened one, cannot be embodied in an individual. It's open to the collective. It's a state of awareness. It's a way of relating. It's not something that can be put into a person, which is exactly the problem when Christianity turned Jesus into God. It's the same phenomenon.
Right. And Jesus himself at one point says, "Do not cling to me." He says that to Mary Magdalene. But if you read that in a way, it's don't cling to me. Go beyond.
Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've all heard of the benefits of bone broth, but I bet you don't know about bone broth protein powder. I found an awesome bone broth protein powder with Paleo Valley, and I asked Autumn Smith if she'd explain why hers is so good from Paleo Valley.
Well, like you said, collagen is basically the fountain of youth, and most of us are not getting enough of it in our diet because maybe we don't have time to simmer bones on a regular basis. And so we created our powder to make getting the benefits of collagen for your joint health, for your gut health, for your mental health really, really simple. And we sourced it from 100% grass-fed and grass-finished bones. So it is a beef bone broth protein powder that you can literally put in everything. It's tasteless. I add it to my son's smoothies. I put it into his desserts. You can even put it in soup and get all the benefits of collagen without all of the time and energy and investment. So all you have to do to check it out is go to our website at paleovalley.com. That's PALEOVALLEY.com. And you can use the code CHEK15. That's lowercase CHEK 15 at checkout. And I hope your family loves it.
I know you'll love it. Keep your body healthy, keep your kids healthy, and let's make the world a better place with Paleo Valley. Enjoy. You know, a thought that came to me while you were talking, and we were talking about Rumi's comment, you cannot get to God until you become a heretic. It really lends itself to Jung's philosophy of individuation, because until you actually become a heretic by choice, by the necessary means of exploration and expansion, you aren't individuating away from what I would call a herd mentality. In other words, your mind is not your own until you become a heretic.
That's right. It's this differentiation and separation from the collective, from conformity with the collective. And that doesn't necessarily mean that one has to reject what's in the collective, but you have to have your own relationship to it. It has to be authentic, not adopted from something else. And so separating, differentiating from the deep structures, the archetypal structures of the psyche is another piece of it. If you are identified with either collective values or even the archetypal energies, you can't be in relationship to them. You're just
right. They're unconscious.
Exactly.
It's interesting too, because what we're talking about really lends itself to the alchemical stages of separatio and fermentation, because the act of discerning, okay, what parts of Christianity or Buddhism or Islam or whatever your primary programming is an act of not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but laying all the chips on the table. For example, when I look at the Bible, I can find all the passages where it says God is love. I'll take that. You know, that's useful to me. When Jesus says, lift the stone and I will be there, split the wood and I will be there. That's a clear message that God is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to go to a church and put money in a hat to be connected to God. And the act of fermentation can be interpreted as you don't have to rush to fix the problem, because you don't really know what the problem is. You know that you're uncomfortable. You know that things aren't working inside of you. It's not creating peace for you, but it's very much fermentation. And my interpretation in this regard is very much aligned with Jung's concept of holding the tension of the opposites.
Yeah. To stay in that tension and not collapse it. That's his move, to let the different possibilities, the different impulses play upon the psyche, means that we don't consciously resolve the difference, but that something spontaneously can emerge out of that allows a particular kind of unity, not necessarily exactly down the middle between the opposites, but some authentic unity for ourselves where we can hold that, like you say, what is good and what serves, and also where we need to go individually and separately, without having to say, I reject that 100%. I throw the baby out with the bathwater, as you said, because there is value, and we have to find our personal relationship to that value.
Indeed. And, if we go into this separatio, allow ourselves to ferment while holding the tension of the opposites, I think one of the key teachings that I pass on to people from my own experience is something that Ken Wilber really helped me give words to, and that is that when we're in that state of holding the tension of the opposites, or cooking, as the alchemist would say, it allows all these thoughts, feelings, and emotions to rise up into conscious awareness. And if we stay separate from them and witness them like we're watching a television show or watching our dog play in the front yard, then we can look at them without being attached to them. And then they become objectified in the psyche. So now we're looking at our feeling or our thought or our judgment, but we're not immersed in it. So now we can actually put it up, see it, and work with it, as opposed to just being overwhelmed or controlled by it.
Right. We're not in some death battle with it where either it's going to win or we're going to win, but we're starting to open a dialogue with it. What can it teach us? How much of it can we allow in? How much of our own position do we need to hold on to? It's an ongoing dialogue, and that can't happen if we're so caught up in it.
Yes, and the thing that leaves me very empathetic and compassionate for so many people in the world who are stuck at this level of their development and don't know how to get out of it. And as you know, it's very hard because most people's whole family is involved in these belief systems. And if you're not ready to stand on your own 2 feet and you really can get rejected. I mean, I know you know that. I've had countless patients that have just come to me in terrible shape, physically, emotionally, and mentally, and spiritually, because they were being rejected by their entire family because they got caught reading a book on Buddhism, or they talked about their interest in another religion. One of the sad cases I worked with was a guy who was gay, and he's in the Mormon church, and they're very, very against that. And he had been in the Mormon church his whole life, but it took him till he was 35, and he just could not take the pain of being in the closet anymore. So he asked for a meeting with the minister of the church, and he told them the truth, and they immediately kicked him out of the church. And when people in his community found out, his family went crazy, and pretty much everybody knew him went crazy, and just rejected him and left him in a very dark place. And my concern is that when a person doesn't have the kind of awareness that we're talking about, when you look at the kind of programming in the Abrahamic religions, it can leave a person with absolutely no hope, because who out there hasn't sinned with regard to the constructs of the commandments or the dictates of any of these religions? So a person can be left thinking, why bother? I'm going to burn in hell anyhow. I can't undo my masturbation. I can't undo the wrongdoings I've done. For a lot of people, there can be a sense of hopelessness. And I think when the environment starts to get crazy like it is in the world right now, you couple the stress of that and the confusion of that with a person who already has an unhealthy fear of God, and it lends itself to high suicide rates and high anxiety rates and high depression rates. And although people are looking at the issues of the day from these perspectives, they're not looking at the fact that the issues of the day are being perceived through the filters of religious programming that don't often equip people to handle the undulations of life.
Right. Well, and it's the programming, and it's that rigid view, but it's also the loss of a containing group, right? The loss of a place that can hold you, the relationships, the other, and to be cast out like that, to be exiled, has always been the worst kind of punishment. We get put into, uh, you know, isolation, and that's absolutely traumatic for the soul. We are relational, and so that's part of what keeps people in those suffering situations, often as long as they stay in them, because it's a choice between it's an impossible choice between sufferings.
It is, and this has been going on for a very, very long time. As you know, I'll never forget when I was reading Baruch Spinoza. I studied him quite a bit. One of my heroes has always been Einstein. I've read 3 of his biographies, and his personal favorite philosopher was Spinoza. So when I found that, I hadn't heard of him, and I studied Spinoza quite a lot, as much as I could get my hands on. And Spinoza clearly describes how he got excommunicated for the things that he was sharing in his community. And if I remember right, Spinoza was of the Jewish faith.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with that, but I think that's right. That sounds, but that's that excommunication, that scapegoating. It's one of the horrific shadows, I think, of the religious.
It is. It's interesting too if you study a number of philosophers and hear their stories. You know, you get people like Nietzsche, who told us God is dead, and his orientation to all this was different. And then you have, you know, Spinoza, and you have all these different philosophers. So you see that different cultures and different eras have different approaches. And you look at Immanuel Kant. Well, you know, his writings were very profound, and they're still referenced by elite philosophers to this very day. In fact, I was just reading the book From Science to God by Peter Russell this morning, and he has a fair bit of commentary on Immanuel Kant's teachings and how they relate to consciousness. But, you know, nobody wanted to burn Kant's house down. He remained a professor. People found his work quite fascinating, and if anything, it elevated him in his status. But if Baruch Spinoza or many others would have written the same thing in their culture, they might have been killed.
Right. That's that, you know, going back to those 4 functions, part of that is that whole sociological dimension of religion, how we are related to the group, and whether our individual experience can be harmonized with the group or whether it can't be harmonized. And this is part of Jung's own dilemma. He was living at a particular time, and he was having his kind of visionary experiences in what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, working with his own psychological images that become the Red Book. But
yes, I've studied.
Right. But how, for him, the problem is, how do you make the bridge from this to a world steeped in the scientific viewpoint? How do I present this material? And so his psychology grows out of the need to communicate to the world in a way that can be heard his deep experiences. But that's a hard work, and really kind of translation work to make.
It is, and you know, one of the books in my library is a collection of letters from all the preachers and pastors and religious higher-ups that wrote, what do you call it, rebuttals to Jung. And having read, many of them, the first thing that strikes me is they don't understand what he's saying. They're rebutting, but they're rebutting on their own interpretation, which is biased by their own belief system. So they're not actually interpreting what Jung's saying as he's meant to say it. And I would see that over and over again.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And he talks about how the moment you start to talk about religious subjects, and maybe that's a warning for you and I, but the moment you start to talk about religious subjects, you're in danger of being torn apart by both sides, right? By the people who think it's all nothing at all, and for those who have a very rigid and literal understanding of it, a very fixed understanding. To hold that psychological dimension that he holds, it's very hard for people to meet him there.
It's true. I've been talking about these things, and my podcast is all about open explorations of everything from sex to God to plant medicines to you name it. So people listening to my podcast are ripe for it, or they wouldn't keep listening, and it keeps growing. So something's working right. But, I basically, when I have people that get all wound up and start attacking me like that, I simply tell them, look, what I'm sharing is my own experience, and that's all I have authentic ownership of. So don't take it as though I'm force feeding you anything. I'm making an offering so that anybody can have a different perspective. And I tell people all the time, any belief system worth living is worth challenging. And if all I'm doing is reinforcing that you are comfortable and at peace with your own belief system, then there's value in that. But if I'm bringing you to a place where you're defending yourself and you're attacking me, it means you're already insecure about your own belief system. And really, your effort to diminish me to protect yourself is a projection and points to the need for you to really sit with what it is that's winding you up so much. Because if you were truly at peace with your own philosophy, you wouldn't be reacting. You might just simply say to me, well, that's not my opinion, or that's not my experience. And that would be just fine.
Right. Jung's take on that is that when you're holding so tightly to your image of God, you really actually don't have a real faith and trust in that, in God.
No, it's an intellectual concept.
Right. It's a belief and a something we cognitively assent to, but it's not a felt experience.
Yes. And, in our discussion here, what keeps popping into my mind is the Gnostics. I studied the Gnostics quite a bit. And really, from my studies of the Gnostics, they were a bunch of people that were interested in exploring the mystery of life and God and spirituality. And they would just get together often at night and sit around a campfire and talk, kind of like people at AA sharing their pains, except it would be sharing their experiences and how they did it. And somebody would say, well, I was meditating this way and I had this happen. You guys want to try it? And then they would try it. And then they would share their experiences. And someone would say, well, how about this? And so it was more like what we would think of as a think tank today, where a bunch of geniuses get together and share ways to solve a big problem or create something new and fantastic. And to me, that's what religion, I think, is yes, there's functions of having the structure, and the function of fundamentalism, as Houston Smith says, is to protect the authentic tools and practices and rituals that led the founder of that religion to their own opening, because they feel that those are the fundamental things that have to be maintained, or the religion kind of loses its purchase power, its agency. But the Gnostics approach, I think if we took the fundamental aspects of it and said, okay, that's one side of the coin, but then we took the Gnostic approach, then we can constantly reevaluate based on our immediate experience whether or not we need to update our fundamentalism.
Right. The opportunity to use what's there, to use the raw material or the kind of the foundations that have been laid for experiments. To experiment, one author calls it an opportunity. The traditions are opportunities for experiments with truth, and that's what keeps the lifeblood in it. And Jung's take on this too is that it's the mystics who are doing some of those experiments who bring creativity into the religious world, so that it's not just fixed forms, but there's still something of the original energy that can infuse it. And it's not just getting sort of dried out and locked down and thought about instead of deeply experienced.
Yes. There's many things I'd like to say in response to that, but I think I have questions coming up in relation to some of my thoughts, so I'll just sit on it. You know, BiOptimizers makes an amazing product called P3OM, which is a prebiotic product, and it's amazing for not only helping repopulate the gut with friendly bacteria, but as Wade will tell you, it's really, really an amazing product in case you ever feel like you're getting any kind of food poisoning or illness coming on. And Wade's right here with me, and he's the co-founder of BiOptimizers, and he knows more about P3OM than anybody. But I can tell you this, I've had nothing but excellent results and nothing but positive feedback from all my clients and friends that I've turned on to P3OM. So Wade, tell us a little bit about P3OM and why it works so well.
Well, P3M is, we call it the Navy SEAL of probiotics.
Amen.
Basically, its job is to kick out the bad guys in your body. Food poisoning is one of those things from bad bacteria. What we've done is we've taken an aggressive strain of L. plantarum. We put it into toxic soup, ran a sine wave to keep a few of them alive. And the few survivors we grow in very specialized medium to make a cultured, patented enzyme that has extraordinary powers. Number one, it survives the intestinal tract.
Yes.
And number two, it is absolutely hunts down pathogens in the body, bacteria, viruses, these type of things. And this is really where the future of probiotics is. It is about developing and culturing and creating super strains of probiotic, very much like the Navy SEALs go through a training, and these individuals have extraordinary powers to deal with chaos. And in today's world where we want to improve our immunity and our function and our gut health, P3M is head and shoulders above any probiotic out there.
So my understanding is it can be used daily as a supplement, but it can also be used in larger quantities as a defense measure.
We've tested this literally with over 100 of our friends who have been suffering from various times of food poisoning. And a handful of those guys, when you're in food poisoning, and within 20 to 30 minutes, you complete recovery.
That's awesome. And I've seen it happen myself. Angie has felt bad a number of times, and several of people in the house or family have. And I say, take 10. If that doesn't feel good in an hour, take 20. And you've told me you can't overdose on them, which is amazing.
Yeah, that's the beauty of P3M. You can't take too much. They'll fight off the bad guys, and they'll get your digestion rocking and rolling the way it should.
So if you want to have a healthy gut and you want some defense, carry P3OM with you wherever you go, airplanes, cars, business meetings, hotels, conferences, and you've got your Navy SEALs in the bottle, and they're ready for you anytime. Wade, how do we get a hold of your amazing P3OM product?
Super easy. Just go to www.bioptimizers.com/living4D and put in Paul10 for your 10% discount code. That's BiOptimizers.com/living4D and Paul10 for your discount code.
You got it. There you go. Try it. You'll love it. I use them. I can't tell you enough how much I love this product. I think it's a genius product, and you've heard it right from the master himself. Get your P3OM. Let us know how you feel about it. Lots of love. I would love it to hear if you have any thoughts on what the human urge for worshiping God, or what drove us to the sense of awareness or even the concept of God? In other words, what do you think is the origin of this urge for God?
That's such a deep question. And I'm tempted on the one hand to say that is so far above my pay grade.
That's okay. I promoted you.
All right. Well, thank you for that. But my intuition around this is that in our makeup is the fact that we are relational beings, that we are born into a world in which relation is key, right? We begin in the body of another human being. And when we come into the world, we're seeking that body, we're seeking connection with that other. And in some way, our experience of ourself only makes sense in relationship to some other, to a thou. And on some level, you can take that far enough and say, well, we don't really know where the boundary between the self and the other is. Where do I end and you begin? Because as you and I are having this conversation, my experience involves you. You are not separate from it. My reality in this moment includes you. And so
Thank you.
well, it's very true. Unless I was just kind of reciting something I've learned by rote and not really listening to you, and I was holding you out. But if we're really in relationship, we are part of a whole that you can't really separate. And I think that when we have this deep experience of ourselves, or when we have an experience that is powerful, full of some of that wonder that we talked about before, we naturally, almost instinctively experience ourselves as confronted by a something, even if we don't know what that something is, and even if that something is a kind of absence, a kind of emptiness or nothingness, it still feels full of presence. And I think that leads into a sense of we're not alone, even in our deep aloneness. That there's a great title of a book by the French philosopher who studies Islam, Henri Corbin, and his title is "Alone with the Alone." Right? We're confronted by a something. We call it God. We call it the universe. We call it the goddess. We don't know what that is, but we're inclined to be in relationship with it. Jesus called it Daddy, Abba.
That's great. I've been interested in the answer to this question for a long time, so I searched all over the world for books that had dialogue on that, and I found a very good book. I don't remember the title of it off my head. It's funny, though. I came across it this morning. I just didn't remember the title. I was looking for another book, but it actually made a very interesting proposal, which I'd love to share with you, just because I think you might find it interesting, and the audience hopefully will too. But it was exploring exactly this question, what triggered our interest or need for or search for God. And the proposal being made by the author is that in the development of man, there must have come a time where when we killed somebody, particularly like in a tribal battle, for example, that we came to the realization that we did not have to do that. And suddenly we became aware that we were doing something, and in doing so, it had taken life away from what it was, be it the person or the animal that we had just killed. And suddenly we're in a position to see the numinous, the mysterious. And then that triggered off a reaction within us where all of a sudden we realize there's something more than just us happening, or just more than just the act of the kill. There's something greater happening.
Sure. It would be that kind of profound moment of like the lightning bolt, or this opening up. The sky opens, and all of a sudden you see, yourself as well. Like, oh, I'm an actor. I'm an agent in this world. I've done something. I've seen this with my kids, actually. Early on, their first experience of breaking or losing something that can't be put back together, that can't be fixed, that won't come back, is absolutely devastating. And it opens up this experience of the preciousness of something, the preciousness of the experience, the life. And why is that so special? Why does that have such meaning? It is a sudden kind of coming online in some way.
When I was 18, I was 18 when my first son, Paul Jr., was born. He's 41 now. And I had my first complete union with the universe right when his head came out of the birth canal. It something numinous happened to me that was so powerful. It blew me wide open. And I remember crying for a long time. It was so overwhelming and so powerful. I had never in my life felt intimately one with all that is. And it really changed me for the rest of my life. I'd had other mystical experiences, but none of them were so profound that it made me have this paradoxical experience of celebrating everything and questioning everything at the same time, because it had taken me so beyond any of the concepts of God or other experiences that I had, which I had some profound ones, but there's just something completely and utterly wild when your psyche merges with the whole like that.
Yeah, and what a profound mystery that is, that you are a participant in, that you are part of the whole that creates that mystery. And it to have that effect, there's probably very few things as transformational as that moment. It sounds like for you it was extraordinarily so.
Yes, it was, and I think it was also a profound gift, because having had that experience so early, it gave me a very good sense of, let's call it a truth meter, for when people were talking about God this, God that, religion this, religion that. Now I had my own deep, visceral experience of union. And no matter what anybody said, my truth meter could measure their words based on that authentic experience. And really, all I could say is that it was the first time I experienced unconditional love, and it blew me wide open. And it also made me want to go light a lot of religious books on fire to protect people. I'm like, oh my God, people don't know the truth. They're getting railroaded by all these, ideas and control strategies. But that we can get into in a little bit. But the next question I had for you is this. I divide religions into two groups. Group A I call authentic religion, or the genuine pursuit of the transcendent, numinous, and mystical experiences, such as were practiced by the Gnostics and by the mystics of Christianity, Judaism, the Sufis of Islam, and other groups that value direct personal experience above and beyond any convention or dogma. And then what I call corporate religion, which is the corporatization of religion, the use of dogma, the creation of large group consciousness and belief systems that are a means of making huge amounts of money and meeting political agendas. I feel it is what I am referring to as a corporate religion here that has triggered a lot of the distrust in God and religion in general, and led to many people becoming agnostic, atheist, and resulted in people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and others in that camp going against God and religion with as much fervor as the churches and religions that they're trying to they're trying to rope people into those belief systems. I've also studied Osho very extensively, and he goes on and on about all the problems of religion for profit and what it's done in India. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how religion got hijacked by the corporate and political interests and what the ramifications are on the human psyche.
Yeah, it's when I think about this, I hear all of that, and I agree with all of that, and I also am aware that this is not something that is only unique to religion. We could look at what we do to the natural world, right? We could look at the way there is something in us that is happy to exploit the gifts that we have all around us, and is happy to make use of those to exploit others. Part of all of this, too, is we have these two ways, in a sense, of relating to the world, to the universe. We can go at things as a kind of dominant self, where we are the actor, we know something, we're doing something, or we can experience ourselves as subordinate. We're not the actor, we're acted upon, we're part of the experience. And that dominant self seems to be what's something that's always been around, but it seems to be more and more the main paradigm, right? It's certainly since the rise of scientific consciousness, when we've moved from questions of what's going on here, why are we here, to how can we use this? How can we make this work? And Morris Berman, in a book called The Reenchantment of Everyday Life, talks about this development of the instrumentally rational consciousness, that when we make use of something, we do it for a utilitarian purpose. And so when this creeps into religion, even when it comes in objectively good ways, right? When the focus is on moral and ethical behavior, it's still a focus on what we're doing, what we're making, how we're doing it. And it doesn't have the kind of openness, honesty, humility, that whole realm of the openness to something bigger than us. And we lose not only the sense of the sacred, but we're not allowing ourselves to be changed and transformed anymore. We're trying to make ourselves more functional, better people, and we can say, well, I'm better than that person. I'm more, I'm kind of more in tune with my tradition than that other person. And we create these hierarchies. And I think of one of my favorite theologians is Abraham Joshua Heschel. And one of the things that he says is, the sense for the sacred is as vital to us as the light of the sun. And if we don't have that sense of the sacred, that others are sacred, that the world is sacred, that the mystery is sacred, then we are more prone to make use of things, to make use of others, to want others to be in service to us in some way, rather than experiencing ourselves in service to something larger than ourselves.
Yes, I agree with that. I think I love the way you've positioned that. I'm sure all of you know that mushrooms have a wide range of amazing healing benefits, and they're talked about a lot in the news these days. There's a huge amount of research going on. And one of the companies that does a lot of research and produces excellent products, of course, is Symbiotica. And they have an amazing new organic longevity mushroom product. So Shervin's here to explain to us exactly what we can expect from this amazing product. Shervin, what have you guys got coming out for us?
This one's exciting because, as you know, me and my family, we've been hunting mushrooms in the forests of the Pacific Northwest and Northeast Canada for a long time. And medicinal mushrooms, the background of it being a Taoist immortal practice coming from ancient China. This is something new, and this is the first time it's ever been done before. Nobody has ever made a liposomal mushroom complex ever in the history of supplementation, at least in this epoch. And what we got in this one is we got king trumpet, turkey tail, Antrodia, maitake, and the queen reishi mushrooms all blended together, all grown here in San Diego in an organic grow farm, certified organic. So nothing's coming from China. And it's no offense to China, but there's a massive amounts of industrial pollution there, and regulations there are really, really low. So this is safe for everyone, all ages. We use organic cacao extracts, and this is almost like a dessert. It's so delicious. The benefits, we all kind of know mushrooms. It's an adaptogenic herb. It helps your body adapt to the environments. They contain B vitamins, triterpenes, metabolites, vitamin D, prebiotics. They all support a healthy immune system, nervous system. They lower systemic inflammation, and it's delicious. It's like a chocolate fudge dessert, and you can use it in any way you want, any application, straight from the bottle. You can put it on top of foods. You can put it on top of fruits. I mean, this one's going viral right now in so many ways, and I'm really excited for everyone to try it.
Well, head on over to Symbiotica.com, Symbiotika, and get your happy California-raised sunshine mushrooms with some high-end chocolate. And what a great way to start your day and know you're loving your body. On checkout, use your code, capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 15. That's Chek 15 for your 15% discount. And while you're there, check out all the amazing products at Symbiotica. You can't go wrong. It seems to me, to what I'm referring to as corporate religion, it really takes on more the air of a university or a high school classroom, and the people that are running it have the belief that what they're teaching is right and it has to be learned and it has to be followed, or there's negative ramifications. And so it's almost like, if you can imagine you owned a school, like I own an institute. Well, if you want to grow it, you have to market it. You have to get more people in the door. You have to have functions to draw people in. And so really what I see happening is what was meant to be more of an exploration of the mysterious and a celebration of morals and connection and possibilities and strategies for navigating challenging times by using the wisdom of the tradition becomes more of a pedagogical urge, educational urge. And then the next thing you know, we really sort of have the sort of phenomenon that we get with the dogma of a university or the dogma of a scientific belief system. And then it starts to lose it's people don't actually reach beyond the words anymore. It's sort of like Jung's description of what happens when a symbol turns into a sign at that point.
Right. That's absolutely true. It's this dilemma. The structure, the tradition wants to preserve itself, wants to continue to go on being, but it closes down the original energy in it, and the focus becomes its own self-preservation as opposed to an opening up of an experience. And Jung himself was really worried about this in terms of Jungian psychology. He was really ambivalent about the idea of a Jung institute, an institute for learning about Jung psychology, because he didn't want it to become a dogma. He didn't want it to become a group of sort of slavish followers who just did what he did. He wanted people to go through their own experience. And he has this famous saying where he says, "Thank God I'm Jung and not a Jungian."
Yes, I've read it before. It's great.
But that's inconvenient for me, who's a Jungian. And so it's really important to recognize that if we are not bringing some original work in, bringing some original view, and we're not allowing for the even temporarily the dissolving of the structures so that something authentic can come forward. So to be a Jungian, for me, for instance, I have to let go of the idea of being a Jungian. And therefore, I can stay close to what's a true experience. And Jung can inform my work, but I don't have to be a particular way in order to feel I'm true to that tradition. That's not necessarily how everybody feels about it, but it's a position I try to take within it.
I think it's really healthy. And, the vision that came to me as you were speaking is that not only every Jungian analyst, but anybody that's spent any real time studying Jung, I've probably studied as much Jung as most analysts have, but I would say anybody from the analysts to people like me that have found Jung in our heart are carrying a piece of his soul. And I would strongly suspect that if he was witnessing each of us, he would be most excited when we, in some way, evolved the Jungian viewpoint by bringing in new avenues of application or new ways of perceiving that somehow built upon his legacy.
Right. We have to, I think I can imagine that would be true, right? And I think what Jung says about the church is kind of a position that we might take to his own work. He says, I must know what the church teaches, and then I must find my own way. I feel that about Jung. I must know what he teaches. I must know the fundamentals. I must know the core, and then find my own way and be an individual within that.
Yes, and the way I've protected my institute from that very problem is I tell my students, I am not here to teach you what to think. I've developed a system for solving problems, or a meta structure for how to think with regard to dealing with the issues of people's lives. In other words, I've given you assessment skills. I've given you motivational interview skills. I've given you techniques that you can use so that you have a toolbox that has the tools that are necessary for helping people heal, grow, and achieve their dreams, goals, and objectives in life. But don't believe a word I say. Go out and test it for yourself. If it doesn't work, come back. Show me what you're doing. And every single time someone came back, they were doing it wrong. And when they did it right, it worked. And I tell my students, I wouldn't be teaching you this if I hadn't tested it thoroughly, because I wouldn't want to make an idiot out of myself by teaching thousands of people to do something that doesn't work. But at the same time, there's now over 40 books written by my students, each taking the philosophy and the concepts into their own arena, whether it be equestrian, whether it be, books on how to prepare for downhill skiing or how to heal from gut disorders, etc. So, I look at a lot of the Jungian authors like yourself and many others, Merriam Woodman and, Murray Stein and, so many of them. I must have 150 of them. And I read a lot of them and I go, thank God for these guys, because Carl Jung is so deep and you have to have grappled with his lexicon, just like Steiner. I've been studying Steiner for as long as I've been studying Jung. You can read 30 pages in a Steiner book before he actually explains what the meaning of the word he was using was 30 pages ago. Most people don't have the discipline to deal with that kind of a cliffhanger in their head, so they just give up. But many of the Jungian authors, I think, present Jung's concepts much more clearly and practically than he himself did.
I think that's right. That's absolutely right. I think one of the things that I have seen, maybe more recently, I agree with, you're talking about Murray Stein and Marion Woodman. They're fantastic advocates, and they make the work very accessible. Often there's a lot of discussion, or there's a lot of writing in my world, in the Jungian world, where it often seems we're talking to each other. Jungians are talking to Jungians. And my wish is to be able to talk beyond that world and to talk to people at large, and to hopefully be able to break it down and make it accessible and available for people.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because many of the books are using terms and concepts that are classically Jungian, but they're not aware that the public has not got that training. So, unless they're going to explain what the unconscious or the collective unconscious is, or the shadow is, and another problem is that many of these Jungian terms, like the shadow, are now very open in the public, and they're being used in a myriad of different ways. So we're starting to run into this issue of, well, what the hell does this guy mean when he says that? And so I really applaud that quest to make Jungian concepts and teachings applicable for the public, not just other Jungians, because otherwise it's going to stifle the effectiveness of the medicine.
Absolutely. And there will be no room for the new, and that new influx that we were just talking about, someone with a creative sensibility that can bring that new energy to it.
Yes. I think that's one of the reasons Jordan Peterson got so famous, is because he was able to take Jung to the public in ways that they could understand, and it struck them very deeply and quickly led to him being a worldwide sensation.
I think that's right. He did a great job of explaining and making the complex understandable.
Yeah. Continuing on from the question above that we were just going over, I would love it if you could outline the essential function religions offer when shared in ways that are healthy. In other words, if I'd love to hear what you have to say. You know, we've talked about the four functions of religion, but you really only gave the headings. If we're in a religion that's really doing what religion is designed to do based on the needs that we have for religion, what is it that we're experiencing? And the reason I think this is a very important question is because your answer to this question can become a means by which someone can evaluate whether or not their religion is delivering what a religion should or could deliver for them.
Sure. What should somebody look for, right? What is it meant to do? What's its role? Yeah. It's I do a chapter on this in the book, and there's a lot of things that probably don't get addressed, but when I was working through this and working with Jung's thoughts on this and some of the other things that I was researching, a number of things that sort of stood out. One is Jung talks about this idea that we've lost a living connection to our religions. And he says, as long as things are going all right, you won't notice the loss. It's fine. If you can live your life, live your life. But the moment that something happens, the moment that suffering enters in, we begin to need something. We begin to need some way of metabolizing that. So many people will start to look for a community, a church, a temple, just a group when they're in that place of suffering, when they're in that place when the world has been turned upside down. And what the religions offer is the possibility of this larger perspective that can contain that kind of experience. I remember how when 9/11 happened, the move of people that day to go to churches and to go to synagogues and to go to temples and was so powerful. Even people who did not regularly go, they needed something that spoke a language that could encompass something that was beyond our ability to comprehend. So it's one place that that kind of language, that kind of symbolism can contain what we can't rationally hold. So there's that piece. The other thing that Jung talks about is without a larger vision of what life is about, everything that we do becomes banal, he says. Everything is banal, and everything is what he calls nothing but. We're just biological beings passing on our DNA to the next generation. That's all there is. There's nothing more. And that's not really a life that people can live. We are beings who need meaning, and we're beings who need a sense of our relationship to the universe, to the cosmos. And without that, we suffer, we become neurotic, we become sick. And so it gives us this wider vision that we can look at. The other thing that it does is, things can go very well for us. We might not notice the loss of the religious dimension at all. and we're enjoying life and everything can go right, and yet it doesn't satisfy. At a certain point, pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure, runs out of juice. It just doesn't do it. It's not enough. And we feel there must be something more. And that moment becomes the moment of searching for something else. In religion, where some people experience religion as oppressive and saying, don't do this, don't do that, that can also be a way of challenging and kind of tempering ourselves and doing what I call a subversion of values, so that we're actually trying out our values and finding out what's really important. And when religion is done well, it can provide that experience. It can be a testing ground for us to compare the values that we're living out of with maybe more lasting and more extensive values.
I really believe that what you were sharing about the inability to feel fulfilled in the sort of the material world, and it's, you look, for example, at how many famous actors, movie stars, musicians have made so much money and had so much success that they had everything they ever wanted, all the sex, all the drugs, cars, homes, and many of them commit suicide because they just feel empty inside. It's as though that none of it satiates them. And so I think that that we really need religion and God or spirituality to hold the vision or the path to something that ultimately is fulfilling. The way I describe this to my students is I say, first, we have to realize that only God can create and give a soul. And the nature of God is unconditional love. And the journey of the soul, paradoxically, is actually to realize what it really is. And therefore, all the things we try to fill ourselves with as a soul in human form are all surrogates for something much more all-embracing and all-encompassing, and that the soul ultimately is not satiated until it experiences what it really is, which is unconditional love or God itself. So if we're not in a mode of relating to life and ourselves, or in a fulfilling religion that gives us this sense of connection to the mysterious and the sense of God or something far bigger than us and far more safe and far more whole and far more wise, something that we really feel that I think when someone has a genuine love of God, the thought of death isn't such a scary thing, because it means a greater chance of actually being with God. It's like Rumi says, I want burning. I would be happy with even criticisms from you, speaking to God, of course. You know, he's saying, burn everything that's not you away. If I can just hang out with you and you criticize me, I'll be more happy than I am right now. And so I think that religion is each step that we go in our spiritual evolution and our growth of consciousness. What was once very distant from us starts to become more and more palpable, more and more tangible. I mean, I'm at the point in my life now, I look at my kids and I have a palpable sense of God. I've got a 4.5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and I have 2 wives. So I live sort of true to my heart, not true to convention, but true to my heart. And when I was 54 and my second wife got pregnant, it was a real shock for me, because I was like, oh my God, do I got to go through all this again? You know, my little boy just blew my heart wide open. And then my little girl came, and I'd never had a girl before, and she's just got me wrapped around her finger. And I love it, And so there's just an example. And having spent so much of my life studying nature, being raised on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, on a 142-acre farm with old growth forest, and being able to disappear into the woods and spend time out there, I've reached a point where I can feel God in everything. And that's my dream for other people, because when you have that sense, I always have what I call my spiritual compass inside of me. So no matter how crazy life gets or the world gets, I just orient myself toward my soul compass and know that every time I've let that be my guide, let that be my seeing eye dog, I've always done absolutely amazingly well. But whenever I let my ego hold the compass, then the pain just seems to magnify itself.
Right. When you've got that compass right, you are at home in the world. You're at home in life. That's it. That's the goal.
Jason, in my studies of the structure stages of consciousness, it's clear that as we grow in consciousness, we become more open to other viewpoints. For example, in Ken Wilber's traditional stage, which is inclusive of the magical stage and the mythical stage of consciousness, we find ardent adherence to dogma and literal translation of text or scriptures. When we get to the modern stage of consciousness, people begin to flower and naturally find interest in other viewpoints and belief systems. In this stage, we find people going to churches and faiths like Baha'i or Self-Realization Fellowship, as I mentioned earlier, and other such faiths that have a more all-encompassing and less dogmatic approach. In the postmodern stage, people begin weighing them all out and can find themselves in that postmodern paradox of nihilism, because all the seeming positives are counterbalanced by the negatives. But those in this stage that have had transcended experiences, be they naturally or through shamanic experiences, with or without the use of plant medicine, seem to avoid the trap and may grow into the integral stage of consciousness. Those in the integral stage, according to Ken Wilber's research, only make up 2% of the world population. And they seem to understand that there's some truth in everything. And it's really just a matter of putting it into perspective. The integral person can see religions much the way we see a small school that starts in kindergarten and ends at high school, and is capable of helping others by meeting them at their own level and helping them gently awaken. With this shared and the tumultuous socio-political environment rapidly turning into a corporatocracy, trending toward fascism today, it seems our loss of authentic religion in connection to the great mystery of life and the four functions of religion, shared by Joseph Campbell, has resulted in a dangerous affiliation with scientific materialism and consumerism, which I feel is a dangerous trap indeed. I'd love it if you could share your thoughts and feelings in this regard.
Yeah. When I hear you kind of go through and talk about the different stages of consciousness, and I find myself experiencing this need for humility, right? Humility around these questions. There is this wide range of levels that people are experiencing. And then there's the loss of the structures and our connection to the functions of a healthy functioning religion. And then the kind of what fills that void and that gap is this corporate experience or the consumer experience. And Jung is always pointing out the importance of individuals doing their work, individuals doing their own growth work, getting in touch with their own depths, their psyche, and that the the social world, the larger world that we live in, he points out that it's made up of individuals. And so the quality of individuals in that group matters. But for him, it's bottom up. It's from the individual up, and it's not top down. And if we're not doing our work, and if we don't have a position, we are primed for that we're primed for marketing. We're primed for marketing from anywhere, from corporations and politicians across the spectrum. And so the importance of individual actors working on themselves is crucial. On one hand, right, we know that, as you and I have been talking about it, there's nothing more important than some connection to wisdom. But from another perspective, from a kind of utilitarian perspective or an economic perspective, there's nothing more useless than wisdom. It's not useful. It doesn't add to the economy necessarily. And when we approach ourselves, our own psyches in this way, if we go into ourselves or into our religious traditions in order to wrench something out of it and put it to use for our own interests in some way, it's not unlike exploiting the resources of the earth, of clear-cutting a forest in order to put them to our own economic uses. So how we treat the other inside of us, how the individual treats the other inside of themselves, determines how we treat the other outside of us. And Jung has this great quote where he talks about will. He says something like what's called will in the individual is called imperialism in nations, right? Because all will, he says, is this attempt to have power over fate. And, to treat ourselves, to treat others, to treat the world as sacred may not produce something valuable from an economic perspective. What good is a tree if you aren't consuming it in some way? It's a tree and you're in relationship to it. And if you're meditating or you're praying or you're daydreaming or doing dream work or something like that, you're not buying stuff.
No.
You're not available to be sold or marketed to because you are connected to something else. But, where it's really only a task that the individual can do. You have to be awakened to it. You can be guided and taught, but ultimately it's the individual who has to be awakened.
I teach my students a concept I developed called the pain teacher. And I tell people when pain arrives in our lives, it's a very good time to look for the opening. It's an opportunity. Arnold, there's an author named Arnold Patton that produced a series of universal principles. And in one of them, he says, if you don't like what's happening in your life, look carefully at what you're choosing unconsciously. And I think when we're in personal pain, family pain, or collective pain, like so many are right now, it's really an opportunity to say, okay, let's look inside the hole that's being created by the wound and see where our belief system or our mythology is not expanding or growing with the reality of the moment or the reality of our day or the reality of the situation of my life. For example, you might be thinking in your head, I don't love this person anymore. I don't want to be married to them. But you may not realize that the wound is really an invitation to have a deeper sense of connection and find out what the wants, feelings, and needs of your partner are and share what yours are instead of just rejecting them and thinking that somebody else is going to be the medicine. We seem to be so trapped in this scientific, materialistic, medical paradigm that's programmed people that whenever you have a pain, you just take the right drug and it goes away, but it never really looks at the etiology of things.
Well, just that idea of we don't go with the pain and let it teach us. We go, oh, this isn't fun anymore. Let's go somewhere else. We dump the whole problem and start it all over again.
Exactly. It's kind of like getting to the 15th mile of a marathon and deciding you're too tired to make it, so you turn around to walk back, but you don't realize it's a lot closer to get to the finish line. So now your feet are really going to be sore.
Right. Exactly. That's hilarious.
Yeah. There's a couple of thoughts that came to me while you were sharing there, which I loved what you shared. It was beautiful. One of the concepts I read, I don't remember which Jungian author it was. It might have been James Hollis. It could have been any number of them. I have so many of them. Might have even been you. I think it was somebody I was studying a while back, but they gave the concept of the inner ego and the outer ego and how important it is for us in our own growth and development work to bring those two into harmony. And I really feel that that's a concept that hasn't made it into most religions or spiritual development circles. And I think from my own experience of working with my own soul and really spending time in meditation and asking questions of my own soul and sometimes having to wait months, weeks, or years for the answer to come. But when the answer does come, it's always lucid and profound, and it has an effect of really bringing me into a sense of greater understanding, peace, and harmony, not only within myself, but within the context of life and the world. And I really feel that, and also in my Jungian studies, I learned how the father has the most influence on your outer expression or your outer persona, and the mother has the greatest influence on your inner persona or the inner ego. And I began using the Jungian exercise. I did it myself first, where the author suggested that you paint or draw a mask that represents how you felt about your relationship with your father as a child, and then do one about how you felt with your relationship as a mother, and then you redo it at this time in your life, and your mask reflects who you are now because of your father and who you are now because of your mother. And I found that a profound exercise, and every of my clients that I've put through the exercise has really benefited from it, because I think that structure, that way of looking into ourselves and at ourselves, allows us to become aware of the archetypal influences of mother and father, the experiential impact of mother and father, but gives us an objective viewpoint so we can really begin to do what we talked about with religion earlier and sift through it and say, okay, what of mom is really working for me? And what is it that I need to let go of? Because it's probably a behavior that I'm unconsciously inflicting upon others, not realizing it, yet knowing when my mother does that to me, it drives me batty. So it's a great form of shadow work, but I think it's also an amazing opportunity to begin to bring the outer and inner egos into harmony, because as long as those two are separate, we really sort of have almost a multiple personality disorder.
Oh, absolutely. We don't live the inner kind of reality that we experience in our everyday worlds. They're separated from each other, so we're alienated from ourselves if they're not in harmony, and that kind of working against oneself or feeling cut off from oneself is part of a kind of loneliness that we carry. We might be busy and with a lot of people, but if we're not in connection with something real, we feel that dissatisfaction, we feel that disconnection, things out of sorts, out of alignment, out of harmony. It's crucial.
I think we also find ourselves doing and saying things that we later go, why did I say that? Or why did I do that? It's as though there's a dragon inside of us that somehow can take us over. And until we realize that the split between what we're calling the inner and the outer ego is there, and that there's this tension all the time in us, and that we're reacting and projecting that onto other people, we don't really realize how the potentially negative aspects of our mother and father image are playing out in us. And it takes a level of awareness to really bring those two parts of ourselves into harmony, so that we're more likely to be standing in our own shoes, so to speak. The Aboriginals have a saying that says, when a man's mind and body do not stand in the same place, he is crooked. And I could take that same metaphor and say, when the inner ego and the outer ego are not in unity, we are crooked. Yet we keep thinking everybody else is crooked.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, we could even see that through the religious lens and talk about the inner experience, the individual experience, and trying to bring that into harmony with, say, a tradition or a symbolic universe of some kind. And if you're trying to force yourself into a religious tradition, but it's not in harmony with who you are and what's actually going on in you, you are crooked.
Yes. Well, the other thing that came to me while you were speaking, we're talking about the corporate aspect of religion and all the things that you shared and that we shared. One of the things that I see is very dangerous, and I'd love your comments on, and I'll elaborate more here as I express myself, but scientism is really an issue today, and science has become a religion in and of itself. And when I've been a professional therapist and coach of athletes and life coach for a very long time, 37 years now. So I've had a lot of time. I've owned physical therapy clinics. I've lectured all over the world in medical schools, chiropractic schools, osteopathic schools, massage therapy schools, strength training, personal training, dance and movement education. So I've really been in the belly of the healthcare and allied healthcare dragon. And what I see is that people actually worship whatever they believe to be a scientific fact or something published by anybody with a white jacket or a white collar as absolute fact. And so when you look at the environment we're in today, and I'll give you an example, people are scared to death about COVID, and many people actually think they have it. But they don't actually do the research to find out that, oh, by the way, the PCR test is completely and utterly unreliable for diagnosing a specific virus. And I've seen interviews with the man that created the test saying flat out it should never be used that way. But people believe just because it's being promoted as science or something that the medical system is saying or Fauci is saying, that it must be fact without looking into it. And when you look at what science has created, certainly it's given us gadgets and things that have made our life easier, but it's also been the source of countless drugs that have wiped out untold numbers of people. Something like, 2.5 or more million people die a year of drug side effects. And many of these things are just the side effects of not eating good food or not having a healthy lifestyle, yet nobody's telling them this. And what concerns me is that people aren't using their common sense. They'll stay up late at night for weeks on end and end up with headaches and then take a bunch of drugs and never pay attention to the fact that they're dehydrated, eating garbage, staying up late at night and not moving their bodies. So I'm really curious as to what your thoughts are with regard to scientism becoming a religion. And when I read your book and have been reading your book, there was a quote by Jung on what his concerns about science were, or his expression of science. And it was a riveting quote. And it was so frustrating because I was being interviewed on a podcast last night, and this guy was a bit science happy. And I warned him, you got to be careful. In fact, I said, give me a minute. I'm going to go get my book, Religious But Not Be Religious by Jason Smith, because he's got an amazing quote from Jung. And then I couldn't find the damn thing. I was so pissed off. I'm like, damn it. I just saw that in there this morning and I was in too much of a rush. You know how it is. So if you remember what Jung said that you wrote, there was a quote in there that was riveting. And I want to hear what you think about this issue of science becoming a religion and what are the pitfalls of that.
Well, yeah, it's impossible to deny the unbelievable impact that the scientific revolution has brought about, and the experience of knowledge and the increase in knowledge, and I think when I hear you talk about scientism, that's different than what science is meant to do, as far as I understand, which science is always evolving. Science is about, we were talking before about with religion, where you have to go beyond God. Well, that's kind of science's MO. It's supposed to go beyond what's known and always be challenging its own knowledge. So part of it, I feel, is, it may be a number of things. Right now, we hear a lot about this kind of battle between, we've heard it for a long time, the battle between science and religion. We hear a lot of discussion about science denial and believing in science. And so there seems to be this question about what can we rely on, what's truthful, what's real. I would say that, the issue of the corporate is, and the issue of what human beings do with these tools that we have. Human beings take tools of enormous value like religion and science, art. You can probably come up with philosophy, and we have a way of twisting them for our own ends, and of having a kind of power motive come in. And so I think when that happens, something that can be of enormous value can be turned or misused in some way. I'm not sure what the quote is that you're referring to in the book, but I do know that one of the things that Jung emphasizes about that is the value of science is that it can look at these sort of general questions and give us a perspective on them. But it proceeds from a statistical point of view. And the statistical, as valuable as that is for giving a big picture, doesn't address the individual. The individual is never the same as the statistic. The individual experience is always unique, always unrepeatable, and doesn't necessarily fit exactly that general point of view. So while it gives us a map, the actual lived experiences of people is so varied and so there's such a large spectrum that if we're not attuned to that, then we end up kind of on a kind of Procrustean bed where if you're too short, you get stretched out, and if you're too long, you get your limbs chopped off to fit the bed. If we're trying to fit something too tightly, force it, that does damage to the individual.
Yes. Your comments on statistics remind me of something Marie-Louise von Franz said in one of her books that I read. She's speaking about the danger of statistics, and the analogy she gives is you can have a 1-ton pile of rocks with an average weight of 2 kilograms and weigh every single rock and find that not one of them weighs 2 kilograms, which I think makes a very important point. Because really what that's lending itself to is your comments on individuality. If we're just in the pile of rocks, then we can actually begin to believe that we are only a 2-kilogram being. But the reality of it is we might be, 0.8 of a ton, and therefore overlooking our own potential, our own grandeur, if you will. I actually had a friend text me a definition of scientism recently, which I'd like to read to you because I think it might clarify exactly what I'm talking about. Scientism, an excessive defense to claims made by scientists or an uncritical eagerness to accept any result described as scientific. Also includes the concept of a scientific ego. Only science has the right to describe the world around us. The fanatical egocentricity of scientism takes on many aspects of religious fundamentalism. And I see that right smack dab in the middle of what's going on right now. And that's what concerns me.
Yeah. Anything that is expressed through a fundamentalist kind of expression becomes dangerous, and anything that excludes other forms of knowing. Science is an amazingly effective way of knowing, and there are other ways of knowing. Art is a way of knowing. Religion is a way of knowing, but they're knowing through different channels. And so anything that is too exclusive cuts off its own relationship with the rest of life.
Yes. I personally, I'm an artist and I'm an art therapist, and I teach art not only to my patients, but to my students because of its value for inner exploration and creativity. And I believe singing, dancing, art, making music, making love, being in nature, religious studies, shamanism, the effective use of plant medicines, giving birth, raising children are just a few of the many doorways to the mystical or the numinous or the experience of the transcendent. And I get concerned when isms like scientism start controlling society and putting people into algorithms and turning us into objects. And that really is something that I'm deeply concerned about, and using as much of my voice and my reach as possible to help people put into perspective so they don't get sucked down the vacuum of this whole thing and lose themselves in the name of objective science, because the reality of it is science is on no more of an objective footing than religion. And I could give a long dissertation on why that's true, but I think Rupert Sheldrake, in his book Science Set Free, and he's got it also is another one called The Science Delusion, and he is a scientist himself. I don't know if you know who Rupert Sheldrake is, but he's a genius. But he really shows us the underbelly of science. And though he has high regard for it, he says these are the things that you need to be clear about so that you can be discerning in what you believe in the name of science. And I think that's seriously missing in the world today.
These ways of looking at the world, they are perspectives and their mindsets, but they also can become metaphors, right? And if things are only through that particular lens, or one particular lens, if it's only the individual as an object, the person as an object, or the person as a kind of machine takes over, the soul is lost. I'm no doubt there are scientists with great souls, just as there are certainly religious folk who are not connected to the soul. But it's so, anything that becomes too one-sided, too cut off from a full experience of what a human being is, what life is, it's not, can't nourish us the way we need to be.
Yes, I think, when you're talking about the fact that there's people that are religious, but maybe even famous for their religious position, that aren't connected to the soul or to the transcendent, I would have to say that it's quite apparent to me, after studying world religion for many, many years, that Satan attends every temple and every church and every synagogue and is a member of all of them. So that concept is alive and well. Of course, I'm also using a metaphor.
Right, exactly. Right. The danger and the shadow is always nearby. There's always a shadow. And we always need to know where we're blind.
Yes, and I often quote Jung in his statement, when Christianity created Jesus Christ, he cast a light so bright they had to create Satan to counterbalance him, which I think really puts it into perspective. And he also said, no tree can grow to heaven until its roots reach to hell. So I really believe that the concept of Satan or evil has a necessary function for consciousness and for our own growth. I think without that we'd all just be, like people partying forever and have an endless supply of money and nobody would grow.
Right. The things like, well, we were talking before about suffering, those dark aspects of living confront us with the fullness of our experience and the difficulty of it, and knowing our own potential for darkness, our own potential for evil, knowing what we're capable of, what any human being is capable of, is essential so that we don't enact it on other human beings.
Yeah, the way I put that in metaphor is the devil you know is always better than the devil you don't know.
Yes. The devil you don't know will take over and run roughshod over you.
And you'll blame it on the other guy.
Right. Exactly.
Well, Jason, I'm very much enjoying this conversation with you. I really appreciate the depth of your wisdom, your honesty, and how humble you are with approaching some of these things.
Thank you.
I probably could use a little more of your humility. I'm an ex-paratrooper, so I tend to go in full bore,
Well, I could use some of that myself. So I would trade a little bit.
Yeah, I'll give you some of my fire. I'll give you some of my yang, and you can give me some of your yin, and we'll balance out.
Sounds good.
The title of your book is Religious but Not Religious, and I certainly love the title, but my fear is that most people that need the message you offer are not deep enough to get the meaning contained within the title, Could you please share what it means to be religious but not religious, and the importance of that approach today in consideration of the potentially serious socio-political, medical, industrial, and corporate influences that we're being exposed to?
Right. Well, my thought about being religious but not religious, and why I titled the book that way, and kind of brought that perspective, is really, I'm looking at this idea of the difference between religion as a thing and religion as an activity. Religion, the activity of religion, the practice of religion, the attitude of religion versus a religion. Jung's idea is that there's a difference between religion, which in his perspective is a word that's closer to our understanding of spirituality. And he contrasts that with creed. The creed is the thing, the confession, the thing you believe, the community. And religion as an attitude comes from this root, religio or
Yes.
religio.
Mm-hmm. To link back.
To link back. He also points out that the etymology of that word religio is not just to link back, but it's to go over again, to reflect again. And so there's the quality of what links us to the depths, to the archetypal depths, to the divine. But then there's the going over again, which is the attitude, the thing that we do, the effort that we put in, and the intention that we have. There's a great quote from Goethe, which is that, all the important thoughts have already been thought. All that needs to happen is for us to think them again. And what that means for me is not just become acquainted with them, but think them, to get them into our experience, to transform them through our own experience. And so that attention, Jung's definition of religion is a careful consideration of the irrational facts of experience or of the numinous, a careful consideration or a careful observation. It's to pay attention to that dimension of experience, not through a realm of belief, through a realm of fixed ideas, but to be in relationship with that dimension. And in a way, this could apply to any field of endeavor. It doesn't even have to be religion. Whatever it is, it could be art or politics, philosophy, science, as we were talking about. You can be religious in one way, hold it as a fixed belief system, or religious in another way, where you are open to the wisdom and responsive and in a communication with it and in a relationship with it. And so it's helpful to have the structures. It's helpful to have the religious structures, the traditions, the symbols. One of the reasons I say religious but not religious, and not spiritual but not religious, which is the more common phrase, is that it's helpful to have a connection to the tradition and yet not be sort of slavishly caught up in it, to have a truly religious relationship with that. And you used the word maturity before when we were talking, and this is it requires that kind of maturity. It requires the ability to not demand that the institution do this or be a perfect kind of mother or father, but to have some independence from it, even as we are in relationship with it.
I think that's really healthy and important. You know, most of the people in the world today are at the traditional level of conscious development. According to Wilbur's research, about 70%, which is a mix of the magic and mythic stages of development. But we have a big problem because A, most of these people and people in general have been conditioned by scientific materialism to believe that a myth is a lie. And B, a large percentage of people at this level of conscious development are stuck in literal interpretations of myths or the myths of their religions. And Joseph Campbell says when the Bible is read as a dictation as opposed to a connotation, we are in trouble. This seems to me in large part to stem from the fact that very few people I've come across in my entire life have any real understanding of what a myth is or how a myth functions within the psyche of man. Jason, I would love it if you could share your thoughts in regard to what I've shared here and help us understand what a myth is and how it really functions in the psyche and why myths are so important to us at even now.
Yeah. I love that line from Campbell, the Bible as dictation instead of connotation, as fixed truth instead of the metaphorical expression of something, the finger pointing at the moon. You know, the psychologically approaching this, our perception of reality is not the same as the nature of reality. We don't know how much what we perceive, how much that lines up with things as they are. You know, there are sound waves, and when they hit our ear, they're turned into sound. So we perceive sound, but that's not necessarily how it is in the world apart from our ear.
In the
right?
wave.
in the wave, right? And so this Jung's point is that everything is filtered through the psyche. Everything gets translated from an experience into an image through which we can make sense of the experience. So that image gives us some orientation, even if it doesn't disclose 100% of what is there. So there's always this kind of extra. There's always more to an experience than we know. And in fact, we're filtering so much. There's so much coming at us. There's so much stimulation that we have to sort out what to pay attention to and what to not pay attention to. And the psyche does this kind of automatically. And one way that I think about myth is that it is the way that the human imagination responds to life, right? It tells us what things are like. And it says about a particular experience, it says, it's like this, right? It's as if such and such happened. It's not telling us that this is what it is. It tells us what it's like. And in a sense, it's the closest that we can get. And there's another definition, and I think this is Joseph Campbell's definition. He says that myth is that which never was, but always is. It's not something that points to an objective happening some point in time in the past, but is a reality that is ongoing. We're always in the myth, right? It doesn't refer to something that takes place in the field of time. And you talked about chaos earlier, right? And the creation stories. So, when we read in the Bible that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters, and that's what's happening at the beginning of creation, it's not a story about what happened once upon a time. It tells us something about what creation is always like, what's always going on, what's happening right now, that things start in a kind of formlessness, in a kind of chaos. And as we sort of give attention to that and hover over it and brood upon that, some force, some inspiration, something that feels like an other comes in and stirs up something new, creates something new. So the myth is relevant in that it tells us about what happens to us, not what happened to some people way back in the distant ancient past, but what happens to us right now. That formlessness, that sort of chaotic water is right here, right now. And we are always acting out of some myth or other. We're always in some kind of story. Sometimes that story is a narrow one, it's a small one, right? That's the story that many people live. You get up in the morning, you go to work, you come home, you watch some television, you go to bed, and you do it all again. And as long as you can pay off your mortgage, life is good. And that story works for many, many people, and that's fine. But it doesn't work for many other people. It's too narrow of a story.
Too flat.
And too flat, it doesn't hold as much of the all that we can be. So what a myth does is that if we know, if we have some sense of the myth that coincides with our experience, either of creation or any other experience, that places our personal story in the context of a larger story. Oh, it's not just me this happens to. This is what happens to human beings. When I get lost and get off track, and I don't know what's going on from moment to moment. I have those moments where everything seems dark. I've wandered into the forest, like all of those characters in fairy tales and myths. They've wandered into the forest. Those stories give us orientation when we don't have it ourselves.
Yeah. It's interesting. As you were talking, I was reminded, are you familiar with who James Carse is?
James Carse, yes, I think I've heard at least part of your interview with him. He's
He's amazing. He wrote the book he wrote multiple books, but two of my favorites are Finite and Infinite Games and A Religious Case Against Belief, which would have been very good support for your book in many ways. But in my interview with him, one of the definitions he gave of myth that I thought was absolutely stunning was a myth is a story that tells itself.
Yeah, wow.
The reason I think that's relevant to our discussion is because here we all are. And without our story, we really don't have anything. We've got Alzheimer's, if anything. And you know the old saying about Alzheimer's, the nice thing about having Alzheimer's is you get to meet new people every day. So they just never really get past the beginning of their story. But the rest of us, I mean, every minute of the day, if you turn on the radio, the news, or look at your phone, there's a story unfolding, somewhere, somehow. And our own story is unfolding as long as we're conscious that we're engaged. And it may unfold even after we're what we call dead, or at least physically dead, depending on one's orientation in that regard. But I think one of the reasons that's such a powerful definition of myth is because it points to something transcendent, because I don't think any of us is likely to say, I'm the source of the whole world story or the cosmological story, or even I'm the source of, Donald Trump's story or Madonna's story, or, but we're all somehow engaged in each other's stories. We're all connected. And so I love it because that definition really points you in the direction of the horizon, but it leaves you saying, well, who's telling the story? And that's when you really have to say to yourself, well, what is your conception of God? Because if God is source, then God is the ultimate storyteller. Therefore, the myth is really a vehicle of connecting to the transcendent.
Absolutely. It's Joseph Campbell talks about the myth as the way that the spiritual potentialities kind of are filtered into human existence. Through the myth, we connect to the mystery, to what's not known, and it brings those energies, those powers, those truths into our human life.
Earlier you used the Buddhist metaphor of the finger pointing toward the moon, and I wanted to share something with you. I was watching an interview with Houston Smith, who I love and I've studied quite extensively, and he used exactly that same metaphor. In fact, it was an interview with Jeffrey Mishlove on Thinking Aloud, and the topic was the traditional, the modern, and the postmodern eras, and the differences and the benefits and the challenges of each of them. But in the interview, Jeffrey Mishlove was asking about something with regard, if I remember right, to interpretation of scripture, or why people get so confused over some of these things. And Houston Smith said something really beautiful. He said, if I hold my finger up and point to the moon, it's not because of my finger that you can see the moon. It's because my arm is at the right angle. And if you align yourself with the angle, you will see the moon. So he proceeded to say, when we're interpreting scripture, if we have the right angle, then we get what the scripture is meant to convey to us. But if we're coming at it from the wrong angle, we won't see the moon.
Wow, that's a great image.
Isn't it? I mean, it's like if you're pointing a telescope and you want to see Venus, you have to have the angle right. If you're 1 degree off and something's thousands and thousands of miles away, you're going to be many miles off target. And I think, when we use that term, do you understand my angle here? We're really saying, are you comprehending the line of thinking or the way of perceiving I'm trying to convey to you? And if someone says yes, then we know that we have an understanding, that we're in harmony together. I think all these topics are so important, which is why I really wanted to have you on the podcast and, get it from the author, so to speak, instead of me trying to do a book review or something. Because it is I think your book is a very, very important book for today. I really, really do.
Oh, thank you.
My next question is on the mystical and the numinous. And today we're in the throes of what is now being called the third wave of psychedelics, or a third psychedelic revival, which is well known for including mystical numinous experiences. In your book and in many books I've studied on these topics, it's quite clear that the human psyche has a need for mystical and numinous experiences. In fact, Stanislav Grof says they're as important as any form of nutrition for the human being. Could you please explain what a mystical experience is and what a numinous experience is, and why it is that we seem to have a need for these experiences as a form of psychic nutrition?
Yeah. The mystical experience, this is a word that Jung was often called a mystic, and he didn't really like it. And it's a word that's much maligned. But really, I think that the idea of a mystical experience has to do with this direct experience of reality, of going beyond all conceptual categories, and aiming towards a direct experience of something. One of the authors that I really love, a theologian and a philosopher, Raymond Panikar, talks about how different different kinds of people experiment with different things. The scientist experiments with objects or things related to those objects, and the philosopher experiments with ideas. But the mystic or the monk experiments with themselves. They use themselves to get into connection with reality, with something that is not filtered through the mind. And the numinous is an experience of this sort of powerful agent, something that acts on us, something that we don't create, but we encounter. And we're talking before about the idea of being a machine. Human beings are not machines. We can't just fuel up with just with some food and some water. Man cannot live by bread alone. We need something that also fuels and feeds the soul, the psyche, the spirit. I think about how waking life can't sustain itself without sleep and without dreaming. That there is something in us that needs to kind of go offline in order for a lot of learning and integration and healing to take place. And the way I think of the mystical experience is it's similar to that, except it's not sleep. It's the other side. It's something like a different kind of being awake. But again, not with the ego in place or the conscious mind determining. It's a kind of way of being connected, a kind of infusion of the transpersonal. We need our everyday life to be fueled by meaning. We need to be part, Jung talks about, we need to feel that our life is part of a divine drama, that it's not just our little drama, that we're part of that divine drama. We're talking about myth before, that we're participating some way in that myth, and that there's something bigger than us, something more than just getting and spending and that kind of thing. And without that larger background, without that bigger story, without that myth, we're compelled to seek these heightened experiences in destructive ways, addictions, consumerism, different entertainments that don't feed us, that don't last. And Jung says even war becomes something exciting because now we go, oh, something important is happening. The danger, if we don't have a connection to the transpersonal, will create destructive outlets.
Yes, it's true. At this time, when anxieties are high, depression rates are skyrocketing along with suicide rates, people naturally gravitate toward religion for support and hope. Can you make some suggestions for how to choose a religion that may best suit the needs of an individual, and how someone might be able to identify the religion or even group within any of these contexts that might be healthy and safe for them? What are your sort of filtration tips for where a person tips that someone can use to lean in one direction or another as to whether or not they're in the right place?
Right. I think it's this idea of choice is tricky, and looking for what's healthy and safe and what feeds us, what gives us that nutrition that we were just talking about, so crucial. The first kind of way, and all we get are hints, at least at first, is what speaks to you, what calls you, what what feels like it lights you up. My experience when I was needing some kind of uh, uh, religious perspective, I came across the Tao Te Ching, and that was
Beautiful.
it was the thing. Yeah, it was an amazing experience, and it gave me that sense of the connection to the sacred. It didn't wasn't able to hold it over the long period. I still find it extremely valuable and important, but there was more that apparently I needed. But that's the first piece, right? What calls to you? What seems to be seeking you? But the other piece is this importance. So we've talked about this a few times. The individual. That anything that feels like it wants to cut off the individual spirit is not healthy. Anything that says the group is most important, or this organization is most important, anything that is not wanting the full flowering of the individual as they are is not aimed at freedom. It's not aimed at the kind of freedom that a healthy religion is aimed at. So is it something that's open, right? Does it feel like there's room for questioning? Does it allow for questions, or does it want to give you answers? My take on things is that religion is not an answer. God is not an answer to any question. God is a question. God's the ultimate question. It's like, what is this all about? And if that opportunity for questioning, that sense of seeking is allowed and encouraged, there's a good sense that that's a healthy place.
One of the things I warn people about is whenever you're in a church, temple, synagogue, etc., and you hear somebody saying, our interpretation is the only correct one, that's when you're in a dangerous spot.
Right. Anything that wants to merge people into one way of thinking, one thought, one perspective, that can't function in a marriage, can't function in a friendship. It's not going to function in a relationship.
Nope.
And we live
That's a
in
good
a
example.
well, but it's, and there are people in those things, in marriages, who try to, like, we're going to do things my way, we're going to think my way, and it's a constant battle. And if it's a battle, that's not life-giving.
No, it's not facilitating love either.
It's not facilitating love. And the other piece for me is that we live at a time, and we live in a world where, the idea that there can be one truth, that there can be an exclusive truth. That may have been possible when we were living in small groups, but we live in a world that is connected. We know about these other traditions, these other religions. We know about people on the other side of the globe. And if a religion can't handle the pluralistic reality of our world, the diversity of our world, it can't move us into uh, uh, the future as it actually exists, or the present moving into the future as it actually exists for us.
That's one of my concerns with all the censorship going on right now. It's killing the diversity of human thought connection, expression, and it's doing to the soul and the mind what monocropping does to commercial to farming. It wipes out the diversity in nature, which destabilizes nature. And I was watching a documentary about how there's so many restrictions on college campuses, and this is what kicked Jordan Peterson into gear with all the linguistics and sexual classifications and things that he thought were unethical for his university to do. But we have all these groups of people that don't want to hear about anything that doesn't fit their own belief system or philosophy. But I say, wait a minute, what would you rather have? Some nutcase who's a potential serial killer on the internet saying, I'm going to go kill people because I don't like them, or keeping it secret so nobody knows to be aware that they have that in the environment? If we had social media when Hitler tried to take the world over, we could have gotten wind of Nazism, and we could have been aware that there's enough people thinking that way that we need to bring it up into our awareness and consider addressing it and coming together and saying, how do we, soften this, and how do we engage this before the dragon is unleashed? So I think with all the censorship, they're just really, they're doing two things. They're stopping a lot of truth from coming into people's conscious awareness, but they're also limiting our awareness of any evil other than the ones that they want to sell.
Well, there's no question that being conscious of dangers is safer than not knowing where they are.
Yes. Jason, what a phenomenal interview, dialogue. I really love your presence. I love your honesty. I love the depth. Your book is just stunning.
Thank you.
It's a meditation, really. I'm having the same experience as when I read Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse. It was like any sentence or paragraph can throw me into a deep contemplative meditation. That's one of the reasons I've been taking so long to get through it. You've triggered off mountains and mountains of my own introspections and writings, and given me insights for new diagrams for my teachings and my upcoming books. And I'm like, wow, this is like taking my own private little class with Jason here. I better get this guy and talk to him.
Well, that's awesome. I appreciate that. I'm honored to be classed together with Paul Carse. That's
James Carse, yeah.
James Carse. So that's very cool. But this has been just a great experience. I love kind of being able to dig into this with someone who's thoughtful and just kind of be able to go all over the map with this. So thanks for the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, well, what I'm going to do, if you don't mind, if you're up for it, I'll finish reading the book and I'll put a list together of concepts, topics, and discussion points that we did not cover in this podcast, but that I think are meaningful. And if you'd like to do another round, we can dive in and keep our exploration going, because I really think these kinds of things are not being shared in churches and places where they need to be shared. And I think Jung's perspective is so deep and it's so empowering and freeing. And, I think if people really understood what Jung brought to the world, and, the nice thing about this is people like you and I can take Jung's often very complex, deep concepts and unpack them so that somebody can have an aha moment. And just like the one exercise I talked about with the making the masks of mother and father, that one thing alone, if anyone listening to this podcast just does that one thing, it can change their life forever. And that's the tip of a massive mountain of what Jung left for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, this has been so much fun. That would be great. I'd love that.
Okay, well, we'll do it for sure. Where can people find out more about you? I know your book can be got on Amazon. I got it there. Are there any other websites or anything else you'd like to inform people of or offer them?
You can find me at jungiantherapist.net. That's my website.
Jungiantherapist.net.
Yeah. And there's a link. There's to other things that I do, events that I talk at, a little podcast that I have. So there's
good.
a lot of information that's there too.
Fantastic.
And links to the book there. So,
good.
Cool.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm so grateful for you and your work and everything that you're sharing. And what a fun journey we've had together. And I hope all of you listening have enjoyed it. And I want to say, as I often do, thank you for anything you buy from the sponsors. They all have beautiful, sustainable values that are totally in harmony with mine. And anytime you buy something from the sponsors, a little commission goes to the podcast to help me keep it live and healthy, which I really enjoy. And I'm grateful for your support for that. It does take a lot of time and energy to manage it and create it. And there's a whole team involved. So thank you all for contributing. I wish you all lots of love. I hope you really enjoyed a lot of the concepts that Jason shared and that somehow they touched your soul, and feel free to, and please engage them and see if you can look at life with a little bit grander vision after hearing Jason express some of these important concepts. And Jason, once again, thank you and lots of love. And I look forward to reconnecting for part 2.
Awesome. Thank you, and be well.
Oh, great spirit.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Jason Smith. You can visit Jason's website at Jungiantherapist.net or connect with him on Facebook at Jungian Analyst or on Twitter at Jason_E_Smith. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please check out Jason's book, Religious But Not Religious, Living a Symbolic Life, available on Amazon.com and all good bookstores. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. Watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and get your free subscription to Chek videos and more at the Chek Institute's new media site, chekiva.com.